I don't do predictions. I have no idea who will win in 2028. It might be a candidate we've never heard of. I don't even know who the Republican candidate will be. I don't even know if Donald Trump will leave office voluntarily. I'm not in the school of thought that says there will definitely be a 2028 presidential election. But AOC is definitely a very strong candidate. I think people who underestimate her, I can't wait to see their reaction when they see the absolute support she has, especially within the party, but also in the country at large.
Mehdi Hasan, hello.
Hello, Hugo.
Good to be speaking to you again. Look, let's start with the labels here. If we're going to talk about the Democratic Socialists of America, have progressives, that is the politicians of the centre left, just rebadged themselves as socialists, or is this genuinely socialism, an entirely different view of the way that the economy and society should be organised?
That's a great question, Hugo. It's not really a question people ask in this country because it's become such a term of abuse, always has been on the right in particular, but also in liberal media. It's funny for me as someone who moved here from the UK a decade ago to see the debate about socialism in the US because it's so different to our own. There's no real ideological debate. It really is about where you are on the left and a handful of policies you may or may not support. Even Bernie Sanders, Hugo, who has been around as America's most famous socialist for the last decade since he ran against Hillary Clinton in 2016, he doesn't really define himself as a Marxist or someone, Tony Benn reborn in the United States. He's kind of a Nordic social democrat. He wants a better welfare state. He wants a higher minimum wage. He wants universal health care, which, shockingly, most people in Europe already have. So it's really interesting to see this debate about socialism. It really is, as you suggest, where you are on the left of the spectrum. And some people are very proud. There are people who are running for office right now who are saying, I am a socialist. I believe that we need to kind of change capitalism. And they've won a few primaries in New York, for example, Claire Valdez and Darelisa Avila Chevalier. These are candidates who are proud socialists. And then you get Abdul Al-Sayed, who's just a little bit left-wing, and he's branded as a socialist. He goes out of his way. He told me on my show, I'm a capitalist. I'm not a socialist, but I'm on the progressive left. So the word gets thrown around by Republicans as a term of abuse. Now they're calling everyone communist, Hugo, which is completely measured. And then, of course, the people on the left really are using it in a social democratic European sense. I mean, in the US, Hugo, German conservative Christian Democrats would be on the left.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if they were calling themselves the Democratic Social Democrats, then there would be a degree of absurdity there. But I mean, some people would say, I mean, you're not an American socialist unless you want to seize ownership of Coca-Cola and the Tesla factory, right?
That's what some people say. That's what some people say in the UK. I mean, don't forget.
It is what socialism is, isn't it?
Now I'm going to put my British hat and say Herbert Morrison, who was Deputy Prime Minister in the most famous Labour government of all time, said that socialism is what Labour governments do. So, there's always been a debate about practice versus ideology, and the Labour Party in the UK is an interesting example of that. There's, used to have means of production as its famous clause 4. Tony Blair came along calling himself a socialist and then switched that clause 4. But, if you asked Andy Burnham today, are you a socialist? He'd say yes, but he doesn't believe in seizing the means of production.
Yeah, fair enough. Whatever it is, it's a shift to the left.
Yes, 100%.
Did the Democrats lose in 2024, the presidential election, because Kamala Harris wasn't left-wing enough?
I think that is, with no disrespect to your question, a bit simplistic. I do think that she missed out on a few obvious left-wing measures she could have got behind that would have got people out to vote for her. One obvious issue that's been associated with the left right now, not just Medicare for all, not just universal health care, not just getting money out of politics, but is opposition to what Israel is doing in Gaza. That's become kind of symbolic of being a left-wing candidate. I don't think it should be a left-wing issue, but that's how it's become. And clearly in 2024, when she decided to do no break with Joe Biden, when she decided to completely just, be a Biden Mark II, just younger and more female and black, that didn't help her because there were people in swing states like Michigan who said, you know what, we'll stay at home if it's going to be more of the same. We want someone who's going to stop the genocide, not be complicit in the genocide. So clearly that hurt. There's also a lot of data, Hugo, that shows when she was doing ads running against big corporations, calling out monopoly capitalism, that she was doing really well. And then there is an argument, I don't want to get in all the weeds, but there are people on her team, including her brother-in-law who works for Uber, who apparently reportedly suggested, let's not go down that left-wing road, let's stick to the center ground. And people, I think more than left v right, Hugo, and you know this in the UK too, there's a lot of populist anger at the establishment, at big companies, at the people who we believe are responsible for the affordability crisis. So it's not just left versus right, it's an anger at the financial and political establishment and which candidates can best harness that. James Tallarico, who's running in Texas, could win Texas for the Democrats for the first time in decades. He's not a lefty per se. And in fact, he's running as look up, not down, not left v right, which is, I think, a clever formulation.
We'll come back to Israel in a bit because it's me speaking to you, inevitably. Of course we will. But I mean, American presidential elections, they're a zero-sum game. One person wins or the other person wins. I just don't think it's right or reasonable to say that a Kamala Harris, who had been further to the left, who had been outspoken against Israel, would have beaten Donald Trump. I don't think that's remotely plausible.
Well, it is remotely plausible. If you look at the polling from IMEU and YouGov and others in swing states, you will see that the top reason that people who decided to stay at home or go to a Green Party candidate was Gaza. That was the reason given. I'm just giving you the data.
Were there enough of them to have beaten Trump?
Well, it was a very narrow victory in some of those swing states. Of course, look, she lost 7 swing states. She didn't just lose the 3 crucial Midwest states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. She lost a bunch. So I'm not saying had she taken a more pro-Palestine view, a more anti-genocide view, she definitely would have won. But clearly, she would have got a bunch of voters who did not turn out for her, but did turn out for Joe Biden in 2020. And you have to ask yourself the question, why? The Democratic National Committee, the DNC, the party's official establishment, did an autopsy report, Hugo, about why she lost. And apparently internally they had polling and studies that showed Gaza was a factor. When they published the report, that bit was missing. Shock horror. It didn't make it into the final report.
Let's talk about Francesca Hong, who just surprisingly suffered a setback in Wisconsin when she didn't become state governor. Some Democrats, can you see why some Democrats see candidates like her who talk about defunding the police or defunding prisons, ending prisons, at one stage suggested cancelling Thanksgiving because it was another colonizer holiday. Can you see why they think that's just going to be toxic at the ballot box?
I completely understand why people are worried about these slogans. Some of the slogans they believe have cost them elections in the past. Defund the police is a very controversial slogan, as is abolish ICE. Although abolish ICE these days is much less controversial, given Americans have seen ICE shooting Americans dead in the streets. That's made that a little bit more popular. Look, Francesca Hong is an interesting one. You said surprising that she lost. Not if you look at some of the postmortems now of the polls. Hugo, there's a really interesting thing going on in American politics right now. You'll be shocked to hear that at a moment where everyone's grifting in American politics, there's a bunch of people claiming to be reputable polling companies who turns out are not. LA Times just did a story yesterday about a company that's a complete scam that claimed to be a polling company in the LA mayoral race. So you have a bunch of people that are not respected pollsters. It's not like, oh, it's YouGov and Gallup and whatever, your grandfather's polling companies. There's a bunch of new companies out of nowhere that just put out polls. And because we have this social media climate, they're picked up. And what's turning out to be the case, we're seeing in a bunch of primaries, the polls are completely off. And so when you say Francesca Hong was supposed to win, yes, she did have a double-digit lead. People like me are like, wow, this leftist, this anti-establishment.
But you think her chances were overinflated?
100% they were overinflated. If you look at some of the polling, and if you take on board the fact that they were overinflated, then, and you're going to laugh now, but I'm going to say this, then you go, wow, actually, that's an amazing result from Francesca Hong in a swing state like Wisconsin.
I'm going to laugh now. Yeah.
No, because it's important. This is why polls, the French, I think it's the French, correct me if I'm wrong, Hugo. The French, I believe, banned polling in the last few weeks of a presidential election. I've actually always sympathized with that because the expectation games that comes out of skewed polls is really bad. We're going to see that in 28. I'm just saying to you, if you were a Martian who landed on Earth, not knowing anything about the polling, you would go, wow, a Democratic Socialist who talked about defunding the police came 4,000 votes, 0.5 percentage point away from winning the gubernatorial Democratic nomination in a swing state like Wisconsin, which has never elected a woman, let alone a woman of color. So all I'm saying is, Hugo, yes, she lost. But she almost won, which is pretty huge for the Democratic Socialist. And there's an argument that says they're glad she lost because she might have lost the general election and that would have hurt the socialist brand more. So actually they're stronger next time round to come up with a candidate who is a socialist, but maybe didn't say things like cancel Thanksgiving, which of course is not going to go down well with the American public.
But the problems her candidacy had, the fact that even leaders from her major figures from her kind of area of politics, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, they stayed away from her campaign. They must have thought, we don't really want to be contaminated with this, which seems to be slightly a problem with the whole faction, with the whole brand.
Well, no, I half agree with you. I actually asked Bernie Sanders recently on Zateo. He came on my show. I said, why did you endorse Francesca Hong? If you had, she'd have won. There's no debate about that. She was 4,000 votes short. A Bernie endorsement would have put her across the line. He has his reasons. He claims he doesn't endorse in local state races. He's a federal guy. But I suspect you're right, that a lot of these people didn't really want to be associated with that campaign. But then again, why are we focusing on the one who lost? Multiple people won in races they weren't supposed to win. Going back to last year in Zoran Mamdani, which of course really opened the floodgates. He is now mayor of New York, having won the primary, having won the general. He's now got 69% approval rating, Hugo. It's one of the highest approval ratings of any mayor at this point in their presidency, or favorability rating, I should say. He's up 10 points in the last couple of months. He's doing pothole socialism and people are loving it. Meanwhile, you've got, as I mentioned, 3 primary races in New York, all won by socialists that he endorsed. You've got Colorado, where a sitting Democrat lost to another Democratic Socialist socialist running for office. You've got Abdul al-Sayed, who's not a Democratic socialist, but ran as a left-wing insurgent, pro-Medicare for all, anti-Israel candidate in Michigan, won the primary narrowly there. So there's been a bunch of wins. The energy in the party, the base is going in that direction. I just saw a poll on Sunday, Hugo. So I was like, oh, this is a good time to talk to Hugo about this topic. There's a poll on Sunday came out from CBS YouGov that shows in the Democratic base, 58% of Democratic voters have a positive view of capitalism. Only 32% have, of socialism. Only 32% have a positive view of capitalism. That's crazy.
But as we've discussed, they don't know what socialism is, so I'm not quite sure what that means.
Well, it means, Hugo, that they want a left-wing proposition. They want Medicare for all. They want someone to deal with the student debt problem. They want someone to deal with the minimum wage. They want someone to deal with America's blind support for foreign wars.
But it depends, Mehdi, how left-wing. So look,
agreed. I agree with you.
We mentioned AOC a little bit earlier. She recently agreed that the woke one was crazy. How much of the DSA is woke one?
It's a couple of things. I'm not sure I agree with AOC on that, even though I'm a great admirer of her political positions. I don't think left-wing politicians should go down the road of endorsing right-wing tropes about woke without first defining your terms. So I don't know what you mean by woke one. If you mean
I don't mean it's what she means.
I know, but okay. I don't know what one means by woke one. I would need to be defined to me before I agreed with it. I think the whole wokeness debate got out of control a long time ago, and the left shouldn't concede ground on that. As for the DSA being woke one, it's very interesting you should raise that, because people on the left get very upset when they're accused of this, because they would point to liberal centrists as being the people who pushed quote unquote woke politics or identity politics, if you want to call it that. For example, when Hillary Clinton was running for president, she famously against Bernie Sanders said, breaking up the banks won't end racism was her famous line. And there's this line, and there was this argument at the time that it was actually liberals in the party who were using race and gender to get away from talking about the economic fundamentals that people like Bernie Sanders wanted to talk about. So if you're going to talk about an economic left, it was always the left that was pushing that. So I'm not adjudicating this argument. I really don't care what happened 6 years ago, to be honest. In terms of where the debate is now, I think you can walk and chew gum. I think you can take the culture wars seriously, which the Republicans are insistent on fighting, and the only way you win the culture wars is to fight them and win them. And you also have to take the economic issue seriously, which is something that transcends party. As I said earlier, people on the right and left are fed up with capitalism. There's a poll out a few weeks ago, Hugo, 70% of Americans, that's Republicans, swing voters, Democrats, all in that bunch, say capitalism is rigged, the economy is rigged against them, something needs to be done about the economy.
So look, I mean, the DSA does have a website, does have policies, does have things they believe in.
Yes.
I'm going to read you some of them. A 32-hour working week, universal rent controls, reparations for slavery and colonialism, redirecting funding to public services as steps towards fully abolishing the police and prison system, end all foreign wars, close overseas military bases, public ownership of the largest corporations and essential industries, and aggressive wealth taxes on the richest individuals and corporations. Now, some of that are what we might call Nordic social democracy. Nordic social
some of that would poll.
Some of it really isn't.
Some of that would poll 70% with the American public, and foreign wars, wealth taxes, hugely popular things. Some of those would not. Obviously, abolishing the police would not poll very well with the American public. I think people have to.
Reparations for slavery and colonialism.
Reparations probably doesn't poll so well, but it's something that many Americans do support, and many people are trying to win the argument on that. I mean, look, there's a couple of things here, Hugo. One is, are you poll testing your policies? Are you saying, you know what, I'm only going to do what polls well? Because I'm reminded of that line from West Wing where she says, there go my people, let me follow them. Are you a leader or are you a follower? Do you actually just poll test all your policies? There's a separate issue whether a policy is good or bad in and of itself. Right. So reparations, I can acknowledge to you, the Democrats probably shouldn't run front and center on reparations in 2028. That doesn't mean I don't support reparations. I do. I do think we should have a debate about reparations in this country and work out what the way of dealing with the legacy of slavery is. So I think you've got to unpack two different things. Clearly, the DSA has some very popular policies and some very unpopular policies. I'm not denying that.
You can see already, though, what the attack from the right, what the attack from Republicans is going to be. Certainly in the midterms, but certainly come the next presidential election, it's going to be the communists are coming. Yeah, it's going to be, isn't it? I mean, and the midterms particularly, the very existence of the DSA puts this really obvious target on the back of the Democrats altogether.
So I would say a couple of things. One, yes. And there's a very, very worrying part to that, which your viewers and listeners in the UK should be aware of, which is when Donald Trump says everyone's a communist, he's not just saying it to smear people or to, make people look extreme left-wing. It's also part of a political strategy which involves cracking down on political dissent. They have an entire national security strategy, counter-terror strategy, Hugo, which says left-wing terrorism is the main threat to America, even though all the data shows it's far-right white supremacists, it's, Al-Qaeda terrorists, etc. They're saying the left is the big threat, and they're actually arresting people at protests, at peaceful protests, and saying you're part of Antifa. So it's actually very dangerous when they talk about communism. That it's not just a rhetorical smear. It is actually about a policy of cracking down, authoritarian policy of cracking down on your opponents. That's quite worrying. Number two, there is a broader Republican history. Predates Donald Trump and Stephen Miller, which just means you call any of your opponents left-wing communists. And therefore, people like me are like, well, don't appease them. And I actually would go back to 1952 and say Harry Truman famously came out, very centrist Democratic president, came out and said at the time, he goes, socialism, when people say, are you worried about being called a socialist, Mr. Truman? And he said, socialism is just a pejorative they've used for years to stop any kind of progress. And I think Democrats should heed Truman's lesson because, look, in Florida, Hugo, there's a former Republican called David Jolly running for governor for the Democratic Party. He's an ex-Republican, hates Trump, defected to Democrats. They're calling him a socialist. So, if David Jolly's a socialist, really, well, what value is left at that time? I'm not disputing what you're saying, that the DSA will give them an excuse to say, well, these people really are left-wing. Look, they call themselves socialists. But I think the fact is they call Barack Obama a socialist. They call Joe Biden a socialist. They call Kamala Harris a socialist and a communist. The problem the Republicans have is they devalued their attack word. People don't take it seriously anymore. That's why it's so popular, especially with young people in America.
So, British politics well. You're
not as well as I used to.
Yeah. You were a prominent columnist here for a long time. In 2017, I'm sorry this is cruel, but I'm going to tell you anyway. In 2017, you wrote a column headlined, "Jeremy Corbyn is leading the left out of the wilderness and towards power." Narrator, no, he wasn't. Might you be in danger of making the same mistake over there?
Narrator, no, he wasn't. At the time I wrote that column, he was. He had just had a very successfour. Facts change. I've changed my mind. In 2017, he looked in a very strong position. Have you forgotten the 2017 election result? He came about 4 seats away from a
but he didn't get there. He
didn't get there. I wrote a column in which I predicted something that was wrong, but you're suggesting at the time I wrote it, it was some absurd proposition. I'm saying the data at that time, the 2017 election result, suggested Labour came very close to winning in 17 again.
Sorry, no. I'm not at all suggesting it was an absurd proposition. Of course it was an absurd proposition.
The prediction was wrong, yes.
But the prediction was wrong. Yes. And I'm interested in whether, I don't know, maybe once again, you are seeing the things you like on the left.
No,
perhaps underestimating the opposition they will attract from
not
elsewhere.
Not at all, Hugo.
No.
Let me agree with you 100%. There are many things I like on the left. I am the last person to underestimate opposition to them. I spend my entire life complaining about the role of Fox and Elon Musk and the entire right-wing media machine and their ability to move public opinion, their ability to create false scenarios, their ability to destroy candidates. I'm very, very well aware. That's why I urge the left and the Democrats in general to fight back on a rhetorical scale. That's why I wrote a book about debating and arguing, because I see the left in this country is so bad at making the case. It's so bad at standing up for their position. So look at Abdul Hussein in Michigan. I'm under no illusions that he may lose. I'm not suggesting Abdul Hussein is going to win some landslide in November. It's going to be a very tight race. He's already behind in the polls as Mike Rogers pretends to be a moderate conservative and brands him as some, Muslim extremist. Unfortunately, the role of Israel in American politics means now that Islamophobia is on the rise. Everyone's he's being called a jihadist. A mainstream Democrat running for Senate is being accused of being a terrorist, outrageously. So I'm under no illusions that stuff does work on the American public. I'm hoping it won't, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does.
You're a smart man, so you're framing your answer very cleverly, because what you're doing is you're basically saying that you can see the possibility that the left might not win in American politics because people won't realize who they really are because they'll be misled. I'm not going to say they're going to say they're going to lose because they're horrible. I'm on the left. No, I think the left proposition is good. I'm not asking you to say they're horrible. Okay. I don't think they're horrible, but I'm saying it is not actually the more likely proposition that they end up losing because people see precisely who they are, and the American public just doesn't want that.
No, I don't agree with that. In fact, okay, let me give you a great poll here. In 2024, people laid out the policies of Kamala Harris. There's a great poll done. I can't remember which polling company, people can Google it. They laid out the policies of Kamala Harris, and they laid out the policies of Donald Trump without putting their names on them, and polled the American public, the famously right-wing American public. Yep. And the American public picked Harris's policies every time. right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you take off the partisan labels and the personalities, the American public actually does want healthcare, actually does want to deal with the student debt problem, actually does want to deal with endless wars, actually does want a wealth tax, actually does want money out of politics, actually doesn't want blind support for Israel. I don't agree that the American public are not in favor of things that Abdul El-Sayed or AOC are pushing.
But
the reality is
prisons.
they vote against their interest because the Republican Party and Fox are the masters of saying, forget about the gap between rich and poor. Think about these trans kids playing basketball. That's what you need to focus on.
I think that.
I've spent 10 years here watching the media coverage. Just watch Fox for one evening. They're not talking about the issues that matter to Americans. They're talking about fake culture wars issues.
I think that underestimates people's agency just a little bit. Look, in the 2028 presidential contest, can you foresee a candidate from this area of the left? Could it be AOC?
Yes, very much so. I think if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez runs for president, she'll be one of the top 2 or 3 runners or riders. Whether she wins the nomination, who knows? I gave up doing predictions in 2016 after I got Brexit and Trump wrong. So even that 2017 Corbyn column you found, it wasn't really a prediction. It was a kind of aspiration. Look, I don't do predictions. I have no idea who will win in 2028. It might be a candidate we've never heard of. I don't even know who the Republican candidate will be. I don't even know if Donald Trump will leave office voluntarily. I'm not in the school of thought that says there will definitely be a 2028 presidential election. But AOC is definitely a very strong candidate. I think people who underestimate her, I can't wait to see their reaction when they see the absolute support she has, especially within the party, but also in the country at large, if they get a chance to hear what she has to say and don't just hear the demonic image of her presented by Fox, which says she's a dumb bartender. And it actually might help her if people go in with very low expectations. She will have a lot of energy behind her, I think, whichever left candidate does. But even if it's not a left candidate, even a centrist candidate, even a Gavin Newsom or a Pete Buttigieg, whoever it is, they're going to have to change some of their views on key issues, including Israel, because the party base has shifted to the left and it's not shifting back anytime soon.
Well, so I mean, AOC herself, she wasn't anti-Israel enough for the DSA. They didn't endorse her re-election in 2024.
She doesn't support the DSA nationally, as she points out. She supports only her New York chapter. There's a whole internecine issue that I will not bore your listeners. You don't know anything about intra-left politics, but there is a division between the national DSA and various state chapters.
But I mean, is that a necessary criteria for people to be endorsed by this faction, for people to be part of this faction, that they've got to be anti-Israel?
No, I'm look at Abdul El-Sayed. He's not a socialist. He's not part of the DSA. He doesn't go out to defend the DSA.
But
he's a progressive.
Sorry, no, I meant that question the other way around. To be part of the DSA, is it a fundamental part of the DSA to be anti-Israel?
I don't know. You'd have to ask the DSA.
But what do you think?
I think that has become a litmus test for people on the left and center left and in the Democratic Party more broadly in recent years. Having watched a genocide be live streamed to their phones, I think people are finally fed up. And by the way, this isn't just a left issue, as you know, Hugo. There are parts of the right. There are young Republican voters who are now saying we should not be supporting Israel. There are prominent Republican podcasters saying that as well. People are quite fed up of American blind support for Israel, which not only helped do a genocide in Gaza, but also played a role in provoking an unnecessary war in Iran, which continues, which drives up gas prices. And they're seeing AIPAC, a lobby which, like any other lobby, by the way, I always make this clear, just as the NRA or crypto or AI or Big Pharma use dark money to influence elections and help the 0.1%, AIPAC is doing the same in Democratic primaries. People are fed up of it. And I think, that will be an issue. I don't think the next Democratic presidential candidate will be a rah, 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 we must support Israel candidate. They won't win the nomination if that's how they run. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that the American public has now finally woken up on this issue. And you now have polls showing more Americans sympathize with the Palestinians under occupation than sympathize with Israel, the occupier. I never thought I'd see polls like that in my lifetime. But to come back to your point, that's Americans just showing agency and being smart.
But whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, why is it so important? Why is it so important for this whole political movement that you'd think was going to be largely about domestic policy, about capitalism, about social policy, about rent controls, to have something from the other side of the world thrown into the mix?
That's always been the case on the left, though. In the 1980s, could you be on the left and be pro-apartheid South Africa? Could you? It's a serious question. Could you? Did you know anyone prominent leftist in the 80s who wasn't ardently, loudly opposed to apartheid South Africa? Name one.
But you can see, not even on the face of it, how those situations are different, because you didn't have an apartheid South African leftist movement, for example. You didn't have South Africans who were pro-apartheid who considered themselves to be on the left. You know, this is, I mean, I don't think the parallel's a bit weird.
I think the parallel's actually much worse. We were much less responsible for apartheid in South Africa than we are for genocide in Gaza. Americans are fed up of billions of dollars of American taxpayer money going to an Israeli government that uses it to bomb schools and kill kids. And I think that's a fundamental issue. Now you got the war in Iran, which, by the way, the US government is saying we fought the war in Iran because Israel was going to do it. So the problem you have is you have these people saying it out loud that we are fighting wars. Donald Trump said the other day, Hugo, that Marco Rubio is going after the International Criminal Court to protect Israel. Those are Trump's words, not my words. So when you have American politicians making very clear that they're prioritizing Israel's interests over Americans' interests, for example, right now, that is a problem. And I think, by the way, when people say, why are you talking about AIPAC? And it's like, well, AIPAC are the ones that are coming along in these primaries and smearing leftist candidates. AIPAC and the pro-Israel lobby are the ones pushing shit about Abdul el-Sayed. It is pro-Israel Republicans and Democrats who are smearing their opponents as terrorists, jihadists, anti-Semites. And I think that's a fundamental issue too, right? If you're going to pick a fight, both sides are going to have the fight. It's not a one-sided fight here, Hugo. In fact, all the money is on one side. You can spend an interview with me talking about the DSA. Well, what's the DSA budget versus AIPAC's budget? 0.1%?
But see, even the way you're framing that you've got the DSA versus AIPAC.
You framed it that way, Hugo. You asked me, you said, is it a criteria of the DSA to be anti-Israel? Why? And I said, because there happens to be a big lobby that involves itself in democratic primaries and takes out leftist progressives, literally targets and smears them. So why wouldn't leftists fight back against that?
But I mean, that's an American lobby rather than Israel, which I guess is sort of is
I agree. It is an American lobby on behalf of Israel. You asked why, but you asked the question: is why are people anti-Israel? Because Israel is not existing in a vacuum. Oh, okay. What was your question?
I didn't ask why they're anti-Israel. I asked why this is a fundamental tenet of American leftist politics, which you can understand.
It's not just, hold on, Hugo. It's not just American left politics. You're in the UK. I would argue it's a fundamental tenet of British left politics as well. It's a fundamental tenet of left politics globally right now. There are many reasons for that.
I can think
but if your
exceptions.
suggestion is, you can clarify for me. If your suggestion is it's unfair / anti-Semitic, I'm saying there's always been a time where certain foreign issues are huge issues. When I was growing up in 2003, the thing that got me out on the streets was not Palestine, although I did attend some Palestine, but the main thing I remember was the Iraq War. I was 22, 23, I can't remember how old I was, just out of university. Iraq was the fundamental issue for a lot of people in the West. Before that, South Africa. There have been many issues over the years. The Vietnam War was a big issue for the left globally. And you could say, well, why do they care? America's fighting Vietnam. The people in Germany weren't fighting Vietnam. Why were they protesting Vietnam? They've always been these issues, Hugo. And right now, yes, Israel looks like it's America's extension of quote unquote colonialism, imperialism, oppression in the Middle East. It's obvious why people would be opposed to Israel right now. We've just had a genocide. In fact, many would argue that genocide is ongoing in Gaza. They're killing people every day in Gaza as we speak.
I don't think it's anti-Semitic. I do think it's a bit weird, and I think it leads towards some dark places.
It can. You know my view on this. It 100% can lead to dark places, and people like me go out of our way. I think many might disagree, but I think I go out of my way to make sure it doesn't go to dark places. In fact, when people say to me the far left and the far right should unite on Israel, I often point out people on the far right are anti-Israel, not necessarily for the same reasons as me. It's not because they care about Palestinian justice or international law. It might be because some of them are anti-Semitic.
Indeed, they may even be pro-Israel for the exact reasons.
100%.
Yeah, quite. Look, I guess this sort of brings us around. We're nearly done, but this brings us sort of around to almost where we began. That isn't there a more effective body that could exist on the left that does away with this stuff, that just simply doesn't obsess about Israel, doesn't obsess about defunding the police, certainly doesn't obsess about defunding the police because the police are IDF inspired, which is a weird narrative, which is one of the things that makes
it is a weird narrative. I agree.
There's
definitely, let me just be clear, there's definitely, obviously, American police units have definitely had training and there are ties between the idea of police, but I push back against this idea that everything that bad happens in America is done by Israel. That's obviously absurd. America has its own great history of abusing power and human rights.
But this is where it comes from, because if you have all these sort of, as you say, popular progressive policies, and then something that goes in there is, and the big villain in the world is Israel, then it sort of implies that there are these tentacles that reach into everything else. That Israel is the reason why there aren't rent controls.
I know nobody who's suggested Israel's not the reason there's rent control. Please name that person to me. By the way, a couple of things, Hugo. One is I half agree with you in the sense that, of course, I wish there were better representative bodies of the left. Of course, I'm 47 years old. You guys, you just mentioned Jeremy Corbyn. I spent my life watching the left implode, do circular firing squads, etc., etc. I am a Life of Brian viewer. I'm very aware of People's Judea Front, etc. The left is not good at organizing, not good at getting along with each other, not good at acquiring and keeping power. I'm 100% in agreement. That's different to then saying, but there should be a group of leftists that then shed either popular positions or positions that are principled positions. And of course, I criticize Israel not because it's popular, but because I think it's the right thing to do. It just happens to be popular right now because people have woken up to the fact that Israel cannot get away with these crimes. But your point about the left more broadly and blaming things, look, it's very difficult to say that that everything is to blame on Israel. I don't accept that. But you need to be clear, Hugo, especially with your viewers, because we didn't really talk about some of these personalities. The people who are actually in office are the representatives of the left. Go back to the Herbert Morrison line. It's not some rando. I mean, I saw somebody from the DSA, great respect to her, I don't know who she is. She was doing a media round recently, and it became a kind of a laughing stock on the right. People were clipping it saying, look at this mad woman from the DSA saying crazy shit. That's fine. But the leaders of the left in the United States are not the leaders of the DSA. The leaders of the left are Bernie Sanders. The leaders of the left are AOC. The leaders of the left right now in the Democratic Party are the people who just won the primaries. And look, some of them are accused of having extreme views. Some are not. Some have very, very super popular views. So, next year in Congress, there's going to be 9 socialists. By the way, just to put in context this entire discussion, there are 535 members of Congress. There will be 9 self-proclaimed socialists next year. Let's calm down about the socialist rise. But there will be 9 of them, and we will see how they govern. And Mamdani has actually shown people that you can fearmonger all you want. You actually put a socialist in office. Wow, look. He's setting a precedent. He's showing people that the left can govern. The left can be popular. The left can be non-crazy. And I think that's really, really interesting. And I will be interested to see how the socialists in Congress actually pass laws and take popular stances and lead the party. Maybe we should have this conversation in a year and see where we are.
I hope we can. Look, before I let you go, I want to ask you one more thing, which is about the war in Iran and about how that's going and about I don't quite know how to frame this, but quite about why it isn't the biggest deal in American politics. Why Donald Trump is effectively politically getting away with a disastrous war. Why it's not what he is attacked for constantly, not only by his own, not only by the left, but by his own side as well. How this has happened. I just love your perspective on that.
It's a great question. I don't have the full answer to it. It kills me. It keeps me awake at night. It frustrates the hell out of me that he gets away with this. Just to put this very clearly to your viewers and listeners, Donald Trump ran specifically on, I will not start any new wars. Sure. I will not start a Middle East war. I will not start a war with Iran.
A DSA policy, no less.
Indeed. And there were people on the left, Hugo, who I fought with in 24 who said, well, Donald Trump's more anti-war than Kamala Harris. I said, no, he's conning you, you fools. And I was right. Unfortunately, some people fell for that. Excuse me, it's British radio. You can beat that out or whatever it is. But the reality is that he's a liar. He's a warmonger. He's happy to bomb whoever he likes. He just suggested he might bomb the S out of Oman. Little Oman's like, what do we do?
Yeah.
He said he might bomb Oman, a long-term ally of the US and the UK.
Full of US bases, yes.
Look, there's a lot. Look, I don't know the real answer. I think there's many things going on. Number one, I think people are fatigued of protest. After years of protesting the Gaza genocide and seeing nothing happen, I think people have disillusioned in the idea of public protest. They're like, you couldn't move a Democratic president. Protest not going to affect a Republican president. I think the Democrats have not taken a strong enough anti-war line because a lot of Democrats are actually secretly pro-war. I think that's a problem. I also think the other reality is that Donald Trump floods the zone with excrement, to quote Steve Bannon. There's too much going on. It's like, yes, I'm going to oppose the war in Iran today, but after I've opposed his corruption, after I've opposed his locking up of political enemies, after I've opposed his wrecking of the economy, after I've opposed his oppression of immigrants at the border, go down the line. Every day there is a scandal that would destroy another presidency. So the war in Iran, get in line.
Mehdi Hasan, thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Hugo.